Welcome to the Cowboy Up Podcast, where talk is all about the West. This episode is brought to you by the Dude Ranchers Association and Golden Wings Horseshoes and produced by Cowboy Spirit USA. Ever been to Bisbee? Well, after this episode, you just might add it to your bucket list. Photographer Virgil Hancock joins Russell and Alan at the ranch to talk about the fascinating history, landscape, and art of Bisbee, Arizona, all captured in his new photojournal book, Bisbee, the Alchemical City of the Borderlands.
You know, Alan, we get down to Tombstone quite a bit. We were just down there, gave a tour of the ranch. Oh my gosh, it was yesterday.
Well, good.
So anyway, we get down there quite a bit, down to Tombstone Monument Ranch. We just love that whole area. And one of my favorite places anywhere is Bisbee. And it's just a unique and beautiful place, and it's got that great climate. But, you know, it's just a really special place in Arizona.
Well, my family goes back in that area. My mother was born in Cananea, which is close by, and so my family has roots right in that world.
Yeah, well, it was sure a busy place, and along with Tombstone, with parallel but different histories, and
yeah,
of course, the whole area fascinates me, Cochise County, and now that we're involved in Tombstone, it just really is a focus.
When people settled the West in Arizona, they settled more in that part of Arizona, and Tucson was just a tiny little place, and more people came in through the southern part, even south of Tucson, and I don't know why Tucson took off after that, but it was a favored route of people coming into this part of the world.
Yep. Well, anyway, our guest today knows Bisbee well. Virgil Hancock is here with us today. We always love it when folks come to the ranch. And he's talking about his photo journal book, Bisbee, how do you say that? Alchemical?
The Alchemical City of the Borderlands.
The Alchemical City of the Borderlands. Virgil's a photographer, and he's a writer. He's from Tucson. And this is his fifth photography book. His solo photography exhibits have been in the El Paso Museum of Art, the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art, Etherton Gallery, the Jewish Community Center here in Tucson, and his work is part of the photography collections, including the Center for Creative Photography at the U of A, which is, of course, a really well-known place. And we're so happy to have you here with us, Virgil.
Thank you.
Well, I've been looking at your book, just thumbing through it, and you don't want to turn a page because every photograph just grabs you and makes you want to know more and, be more. So the work in there, your photography in there is just spectacular.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
How did you choose Bisbee as the topic? I mean, there's some obvious reasons, but why'd you choose it?
Well, it's interesting. I have been attempting to photograph Bisbee for probably about 30 years, and I've been failing miserably until in 2016 I went down there, and all of a sudden it started working. But Bisbee is such an incredibly visual city, and I think it's the most beautiful city in Arizona, actually pretty hands down. But it's real hard to photograph. And finally, in 2016, the project started working. But I had tried photographing it for many years, and it did not work.
Who's the judge of your photographs? As judged by you, it didn't
work? As judged by me. I have to like it.
Well, sometimes we're our own worst critic.
Yeah.
Well, I think Bisbee is a beautiful city. I mean, it's got some parallels or some similarities to Jerome, but it is certainly a more beautiful place. I mean,
yes.
There's no doubt. And there's some beautiful places. Prescott's in there, Williams. There's a lot of pretty Arizona towns. But Bisbee is unique.
So how big was Bisbee when it was booming, when at the height of its activity?
The whole the whole Warren district was somewhere around 25,000.
Really?
It was in the probably 19, a little after the deportation, though the deportation ended up having a lot of people leave Bisbee forcefully, which is one of the stories in the book.
Do you want to tell just a little outline of the deportation? A lot of people haven't heard about that, and a lot of people will say, I don't believe it, but it did happen.
Well, the Bisbee deportation took place on July 12th, 1917. And basically what it was the copper companies and the Sheriff Wheeler, put together a group of deputized individuals that proceeded to arrest striking miners, round them up in this whole area, and shipped them off by train to the deserts of New Mexico. It was basically a vigilante action. It was not legal, and it is considered the second largest civil rights violation in the 20th century in the United States. The first being the Japanese internment in World War II. But it was, and it had an amazing impact on the town by taking all these miners and shipping them off. Why did it do this? Why did they do this? The miners went on strike. They were inspired by the International Workers of the World, the IWW, the most radical union in the United States at that time, and they were shutting down mining, and it was World War I, and Bisbee was booming, and copper was needed, and the price was high. So if they wouldn't have done that, Bisbee would have shut down. And it was considered they had to do that. And it was a complex phenomena because there was a lot of fear about what was going on in Mexico, because this was also during the Mexican Revolution.
One of many,
1910 to 1920, right on the other side of the border.
So they were the miners that ended up being removed were striking under the sort of auspices of the IWW?
The International Workers of the World, the IWW.
And so what were they asking for?
They basically were interested in shorter hours. They were interested in better wages. They were interested in safety issues. The whole deportation was extremely controversial because on the same hand, the Bisbee miners were some of the best paid miners in Arizona. Oh. So it was the dynamics of the deportation are complex, and what took place was also complex because most of the miners that were shipped out were Mexican or Eastern European. So there is an argument that it was a bit of a racial cleansing of Bisbee as well. So the layers are heavy. And it's interesting because George Hunt was a Democratic governor at the time. And George Hunt had a lot of very strong opinions, and also the racism was pretty significant. But George Hunt had just lost an election to Campbell, who was the Republican. And George Hunt has said that if he was in charge, if he was the governor, there never would have been a Bisbee deportation, because Hunt had prevented a deportation in Globe, because Hunt was he was a former miner. He was a miner from Globe. And Campbell ended up, the election was overthrown. This sounds familiar in contemporary issues. There's interesting echoes. But Campbell had only won by a couple hundred votes. And so the election was recounted, and Hunt won again after the deportation.
I'd never heard this story.
Yeah.
This is fascinating.
So Hunt took office.
Again, yeah, after the deportation.
And Campbell walked away, or did he sue?
No, he walked away. He accepted the results.
How long was he in office? How long after the election?
It was around a year. It might have been a little less than a year.
So for those of some of our listeners aren't going to know, but Tombstone's 20 miles away, 25.
Yeah, little.
So they're mining then too, right?
Yeah, Tombstone has a very interesting history in contrast to Bisbee. They were discovered within a few years of each other, and they kind of both took off. But Tombstone ran into their silver mines primarily ran into water,
Right.
and so it kind of had it did not linger as long as Bisbee did, and Bisbee was really just getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
And Bisbee was all copper.
And Bisbee was all copper.
And for those who don't know, Bisbee started out in underground mining.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then they moved to the open pit, Lavender Pit?
Yes. The first open pit mine was the Sacramento Pit. And that was started around 1917, this time we're talking about. And that was finished in the late 1920s. Then the Lavender Pit was started in, I think it was in the 1940s. And that combined with the Sacramento Pit ended up actually destroying a number of small areas around Bisbee, the towns.
When you say destroyed areas, meaning
it ate them.
Okay.
The towns disappeared.
They became part of the pit.
They became part of the pit.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, my mother's father, my grandfather, was a mining engineer, spent most of his career in Mexico. But one of his good friends was Mr. Lavender.
Oh.
And Mr. Lavender, because if you look at the pit, you've driven by the pit, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of lavender colored.
Yes.
And so everybody assumes it's named because it's colored kind of lavender. And it's not. It's for Mr. Lavender, who was the mining engineer, who was a good friend of Oscar Fisher, my grandfather.
Cool.
So anyway, so Tombstone didn't get embroiled in this the international world workers or
no. The IWW was I don't think was in Tombstone at all. And when this happened, Tombstone was in another phase of its history, but that does come up that's another very big theme is the transformation of Bisbee from a mining town, a copper mining town, to a tourist town. Tombstone actually started that process many years earlier.
Well, Bisbee, I mean, I was living here, 70s when it closed?
75 is the final date.
Yeah.
So they don't do any mining there now.
You know, I'm careful about saying absolutes because when you say an absolute, who knows? But the mining is totally limited if there is any now. It's very minimal.
Is the ore body still there, but just nobody's?
Well, that is one of the reasons I actually have called Bisbee the Alchemical City. There's a number of reasons I use that word, but that's one of them. Because there's one of the histories of Bisbee, and there are many histories of Bisbee. That's part of the theme of the book, the different histories of Bisbee, the different layers, literally layers of Bisbee. But one of the themes of copper mining is when you first have the discovery, the grade of the ores might be 30%, maybe higher. And then as you continue mining, it drops. So in a sense, you need the advances of chemistry to make it profitable.
Drops for what reason?
The purity drops.
Yeah, I understand, but the veins get weaker as they go out in terms of purity, or why?
I think basically in the beginning the copper is very accessible, and then it's easy to purify, and then as that goes away, then the veins that are left are less pure, and that process continues to a point of where the purity is really, really small. But it does raise the issue of if you have technology that is so sophisticated that you can actually, of this very, very low purity, go into places like the waste dumps themselves, there could be copper that is again taken out and profitable. So the kind of the struggle is between the purity of the copper and the price of copper worldwide.
Right. And I've read that several tailing piles have higher concentrations than a lot of the mines that are being mined now.
And there's some trace gold in those, and a lot of that got passed into the tailings, and sometimes the tailings have a lot of gold in them.
Gold goes with copper, right?
Yeah.
Gold.
I think so.
Yes. Yeah. They're often found together.
Yeah. And alchemical, define that and how we.
So alchemy, long history of alchemy that within the kind of, say, the secret traditions or the occult traditions of Europe, there are stories of the alchemists going all the way back to Egypt. And there are stories of Moses being an alchemist. I mean, there's a very interesting long occult history in alchemy.
And Newton was into alchemy,
Newton
right?
was totally into alchemy.
Well, tell me if I'm wrong. Alchemy has to do with changing the composition of the ore.
Alchemy is twofold,
okay.
and I use it in this project twofold. One, it is the creation of this philosopher's stone, and they using lower grade metals to ultimately create something like gold. So that's kind of the structural, physical aspect of alchemy. But there's another aspect of alchemy, a spiritual aspect of alchemy, that as you study alchemy, there's a perfection of the self and an increased level of knowledge that also takes place. So you have alchemy working on two different levels. And both those levels are very relevant for Bisbee, as is the reality of the whole exploration of the New World in the late 15th century, 16th century, and 17th century, when many of the explorers and the people who recommended the exploring of the New World were into alchemy and were alchemists. Elizabeth I, Queen Elizabeth, was a part-time alchemist.
And never knew that.
It's a whole history that many people do not
So when
know.
you say these explorers were into alchemy, they were into both aspects, or they were just trying to turn some lead into gold?
It often, Queen Elizabeth actually had some alchemical apparatus in her palace, and John Dee and Walter Raleigh were into alchemy, and they were two of her main advisors. This is the English tradition of exploring, the eastern coast of the United States. But in Spain, Columbus actually talked about some of this in some of his prophecies. Columbus was influenced as well. So you had alchemical interests throughout Europe, throughout the people who came here, and some of the understanding from this alchemical perspective is they saw these lands as a place to transform, to turn into gold. And when, of course, gold was one of the objects. And so the finding of gold, and especially in the mines of Mexico, but the whole history in the United States,
is one going to assume that somebody in power says, okay, Mr. Miner, you go out there and find some ore and I'll make gold out of it? Is that the way it worked, or was it the other way around?
No, I think when it came to the nuts and bolts of the mining, it was hardcore mining. Though alchemical labs were associated with many of the mines throughout Europe. And so there was very much of a tie-in fairly early. And alchemy basically ended up being transformed into chemistry. So and alchemy is right now quite forgotten, but it's a whole system. And very importantly, another aspect of alchemy is the fraternal societies of Bisbee. And this is a major part of the book.
And we want to let's come back to that right after this break. Today's episode is brought to you in part by the Dude Ranchers Association. I just got back in relative time from the Dude Ranchers convention, and it was so much fun. It was in Coeur d'Alene, and I get to see these great ranchers who I haven't seen in a long time, and particularly with the virus stuff, but it always makes me leave inspired about dude ranching, because I'm talking to the people who are working so hard, the board, the officers, and the folks who go to the convention, because they're excited and embrace the history of the association and dude ranching in general, and they want to work together to protect, preserve, and make better dude ranching. And that's really what the association, coming up 100 years, in 2026 it'll be 100 years old, and this group for almost 100 years has selected the best ranches for everyone in your family or group, or I was talking to a lady yesterday, I have to digress for a minute, and she goes, I want to go to another one of your ranches because I just feel so safe here. And I said, I want you to go to one of our ranches, but I want you to know that you're going to feel that way at all these DRA ranches. It's just got that sense about it. Dude ranching does. And there's something for everybody. Horse riding, obviously, ATVs at some, mountain bikes are getting awfully popular, the e-bike versions too. Hiking is always available. Some have whitewater rafting. Shooting is often available. Archery is getting bigger and bigger. Crafting, all kinds of classes. And entertainment that could be just good old-fashioned cowboy singing around a bonfire, to educational and nature, and it's the West's first destination vacation, and it remains the West's best destination vacation. Dude Ranchers Association are representing over 90 ranches west of the Mississippi, and the way you find out and get to this today's word curated collection of ranches, you go to www.duderanch.org, O-R-G, duderanch.org, and you'll find the best vacation you can find for your family or just you traveling alone. And they can also, if you pick up the phone and call them, they'll help you find that perfect ranch. Well, let's back to alchemy. And then we'll talk about fraternal orders, but I think there's some more about the alchemy.
Well, one of the interesting things, and one of the reasons I use the Alchemical City, is because alchemy is very clearly about transformation. And the Bisbee itself went through an amazing period of transformation recently. And that is the transformation of a copper mining economy, totally copper mining economy, into a tourist economy.
So that fits the alchemy definition?
Yes. In my mind, and I use that to show this total transformation of Bisbee that took place in some of the details.
Is Bisbee as vital now as it was when it was booming as a copper mining town?
No. The population in Bisbee has always been decreasing from its peak in the late teens, early 20s. It's been actually a steady decrease, and that's been for a number of reasons. But the population now is a little less than 5,000. But when the mine closed in the 1970s, in the mid-1970s, there was a huge exodus, huge drop in prices. And that resulted in a whole new group of people coming into Bisbee, and ultimately a revitalization of the town as this tourist center, which is what is going on now.
One more question before we leave the mines. Is there still an ore body there, and how big, and will it ever come back and be mineable or profitable? I mean, it's what we've all started, but is it just waiting for a new life?
Spike in copper price?
Yeah, I do not know if below Bisbee how much is left there. I think in the the waste dumps around Bisbee, there is a possibility of that. But it's
that'd be recycling, but not from the basic ore body.
I don't think so. The other thing is the having an open pit mine, which is less expensive than the
tunnel,
underground mines.
Right, underground.
I think the level of environmental damage, I don't think would be tolerated right now.
Yeah, it's interesting because Rosemont would be an open pit, right? And,
yes, exactly.
And it's how many years in court?
Yes, for 10, 15, 20 years with, and the other is the Resolution mine near Superior that's recommended as an open pit mine. So the mining issues remain very alive. And it's very interesting about the Cananea roots that you have. Cananea is the third largest copper mine in the world, and the Clifton Morenci is the fourth. So
really, Cananea is bigger than Morenci?
Yes, it is bigger than Morenci.
Didn't know that.
And this is a really amazing area when it comes to copper mines, and it's continuing. The journey is on.
Why that blows my mind is we had a railroad that ran through the ranch, and it hauled copper from Morenci to the main line, and there were train loads every day of copper that went through there. So Bisbee being bigger than Morenci just blows my mind because than Cananea. Because I've watched hundreds of those. They've run over a lot of our cattle.
Oh, have they?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. So back to fraternal orders, and our a good friend is a member of the Masons in Bisbee, and you have this great photo in this cave of some Masons, I think. Were they Masons? It's a great photo, and it's a cave. It's not a mine because it's got the stalactites. And tell us a bit about that. It's a couple of photos, actually.
So in the mining that was done, the mines went down, the underground mines went down thousands of feet. They would discover caves, and there are a lot of caves that were interwoven into the mines. In the Czar mine, there was this one cave discovered, and we're in the 1890s now, and the Masons, who were very powerful in Bisbee, by the way, that was the lead fraternal organization, but there were many fraternal organizations. Masons number one. The Masons decided to have a meeting in this cave in 1897. And they had all these Masons throughout Arizona come. They went 600 feet down in these shafts that the miners took, and then they had their uniforms on, and they went into this cave, and they had this meeting. And what you see in the book is a colorization of several black and white photographs of this meeting in this cave 600 feet below the surface.
Well, for all of our listeners, not all of them know about fraternal organizations and what. So tell just a quick thing about what the purpose of the Masons were and how many were there in Bisbee.
Well, that is a really good point that you bring up. We forget our past, and at the end of the 19th century, it was estimated that 41% of men were members of fraternal societies in the United States. 41%. Wow.
That's amazing.
It is amazing. And in Bisbee, it's likely that the percentage was actually higher because fraternal organizations had interesting belief structures. And the belief structures, by the way, especially with the Freemasons, were connected to some spiritual alchemy. So that all this stuff is related. And in a fraternal organization, there is a type of rebirth that often happens as you become a member. And I go through the Improved Order of the Red Men, which was a fraternal organization in Bisbee, which I have a couple of colorized images in the book of. But in this ceremony, the whole idea is this: the individual who leads the lodge is going to kill the initiate, and refrains from killing the initiate, holds an axe over their head, the last moment, and they are reborn as a member of the lodge. So there's a very interesting death and rebirth into the lodge membership, which, by the way, is also fairly similar to the whole world of alchemy.
So if in Bisbee, because I'm imagining, so you've got these 1,200 strikers.
Yes.
So pre-strike, let's say, before the deportation. You've got these miners. Some of them were Mexicans. Some of them were East Europeans. Might have had some racial connotations. And you've got the mining executives, and then you've got, of course, all the merchants. And so were these fraternal orders, were they egalitarian, or were they sort of social stratifications?
It's another really good question. The fraternal orders in general started out primarily as Anglo-Saxon European. However, what took place, and this took place everywhere, is that other groups who were not Anglo-Saxons, Mexicans, Eastern Europeans, African Americans, Chinese formed their own fraternal organizations. So you had this phenomena and Globe is a good example, where you had multiple fraternal organizations of different groups.
And the general purpose of these fraternal groups would be to improve their life or get more wages, or
it was the Knights of Labor. That was actually the union. The Knights of Labor was also a fraternal organization with secret signs when it started in the beginning. But the idea of getting into a fraternal organization, one, it was a place of support. It was where people could meet other people in the town. So there, in a sense, business connections. It was also something to do. You would go and have these meetings. The fraternal organizations also provided life insurance. And the whole idea of life insurance actually started out of these fraternal organizations. And some of them have morphed into a number of nonprofits and for-profits that are very influential now. By the way, the original fraternal organizations were all secret, and you weren't supposed to share. There were secret signs, secret rituals. And then in the 1920s, the Kiwanis Club, the Rotarians, the Lions, and all these non-secret organizations, which are everywhere today, started to
kind of took over.
Took over, yes, from some of the more secret.
If the Masons, and of course Masons, they're on all kinds of different TV shows because of Dan Brown's books and the connection to the Templars and that whole, great fiction, maybe, a lot of basis to it. But so since Masons were the largest in Bisbee, who were they? Who comprised that group?
The Masons were the leadership in Phelps Dodge.
Okay.
And to show how clearly that is, the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum is the Phelps Dodge headquarters.
Right.
There are 2 floors to that building. The lower floor was the Phelps Dodge offices, now the Mining Museum. The higher floor was the first Masonic temple in Bisbee.
Interesting.
In my book, I have a picture of that colorized of the first Masonic temple.
Is Phelps Dodge still active in the area? If they don't mind, why would they be there?
This is from a Sanborn map of about 1904. So this is actually at the very beginning of Bisbee. The fraternal organization, the Masons, were established. What happened is they moved out of the Bisbee of their office, and they have a temple down the road now in Tombstone Canyon, which probably your friend goes to.
Right. So this great photo in this cave, and I think off air you said 6 months later it collapsed?
6 months later, the cave that this ceremony took place in for the Freemasons collapsed.
And in the photo, it shows it's got a nice wood floor, so it was an improved area. And
it has electric lights in 1897.
No
electric
kidding.
lights.
Then what happened? They mined too close to it with another mine or something?
Why it collapsed, these are very fragile places underground. And I think a number of the caves collapsed. About 10 years later, there was another fraternal society that had a meeting underground, and that cave collapsed much sooner than 6 months.
How did they get down there 600 feet? Just through the elevators?
Through these elevators where the miners would. So the masons,
same place.
Yeah, the masons went on these mining elevators and then went down 600 feet.
Interesting. So these photos,
that's the picture right
yeah.
there.
So some of your photos are still black and white. Some of them have been colorized. The photo we're talking about is colorized. Who did that? It's really interesting, the result.
I worked creating the book. There's several types of photos. One is my own photos that I took. Then also black and whites that I obtained at research and archival centers. The Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum was one. The Arizona Historical Society in Tucson was another. So I had to get permission to use their photographs and permission to colorize the photographs. I worked with Tim P. Camera on the colorization of the photographs, and I found a person up there who's outstanding digital work. So he was it was a team in Tim P. Camera, Katie and Jarrett, who helped me with creating a number of the images that are seen here.
You have quite a little bit in your book about ghosts.
Yes.
Would you address that for a minute? We don't want to get through here and miss that part of the book.
That is, I'm glad you mentioned that. That is the very last large chapter. And in many ways, what the book is about and the photographs are about is the bringing of the past into the present and the present into the past. So there's a sense of everything here now, and ghosts fit very nicely into that. Bisbee has one of its tourist aspects is ghosts, and ghosts are throughout all these different organizations in all these different institutions, hotels, homes, various buildings. All of Bisbee is haunted. I actually go through
So do they bring you coffee for breakfast and that kind of stuff, or what's their function?
Well, here, this gets very back into time, is in the leading mining book of the 16th century, written about 1587, called De Metallica. The author of that book talks about gnomes, underground gnomes, who you can run into. And these can be a danger for miners. And so the gnomes they'll dress.
Spell that.
Gnomes.
I thought so, but I just want to bring that out.
So regular gnomes.
Regular gnomes. And they can look like miners, but they're not doing much. They're kind of picking up petals, and they might be a little smaller, but you can run into them underground. And if you irritate one, not good.
Oh.
Not good. They can
might
get
kill you,
harmful.
huh?
Yes, they could do bad things. And so there's a very interesting other history of Bisbee about things happening. So I actually bring in the gnomes of the
1588 book.
Yeah.
And there's the ghost of Zacatecas Canyon.
Yes, that was that's in the Bisbee Review. A very strange event. A woman was seen initially around April or May. She was
1892.
This is around 1910.
Okay.
Around 1910. And she was yelling, and people were wondering what was going on. She was kind of like up in the hills, and they tried to find her, and they found a dead baby. And then she disappeared.
Fresh dead or long time carcass?
Fresh.
Yeah.
Then she disappeared. And then what took place 6 months later is she came back, and rocks were thrown down the canyon at the people who lived below, and they armed themselves going searching for someone. But this became the ghost of Zacatecas Canyon. It's all in the Bisbee Review, and it has been written about by other individuals, but they never found anybody.
And this went on for how long?
This went on for about 2 weeks.
Really?
And Sheriff, the Constable Parley, I believe, came and looked around trying to find, and he thought that it was somebody who was probably insane who was doing this up there, but nobody was ever found. But the woman in white came back. She was seeing the whole thing, and then it just became silent again.
They're waiting to be rediscovered. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
So you of course got photos out of all kinds of places. We talked about that earlier, but you also took a lot. You've been in Bisbee. You see any ghosts?
No, but there is a very interesting phenomena of Bisbee, and that's Bisbee during the day and Bisbee at night. Bisbee at night is a very different place, and my images actually capture that. I have several images that get a sense of Bisbee at night, and it's fascinating because there it's like two different worlds.
Talk a little more about that. Explain what the two worlds are.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
The photos, in some ways, this is it's kind of interesting. The photos, in some way, capture this more than I could explain it in words. But I can say Bisbee during the day is everything's very present. There's people moving around, lights, the sunlight, even if the lights go off for some reason or the rainstorm is dark, very present. Bisbee at night, there is an intense emptiness. And you can really feel this whole distance from the day. I felt, and that I actually photographed. It is it's a very unusual phenomena. And some of the writing of people who write about Bisbee talk about this kind of thinning of time between what we see around us now and what potentially is on the other side. And you can feel this in Bisbee.
So the old saloons and all that don't exist anymore, and nightlife of that kind?
No, the saloons exist, but there's a containment. I mean, there's something with the darkness and its situation in the canyons, I think, that it makes for a very different feel. Bisbee during the day.
So
Bisbee at night.
Visit Bisbee during the day. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Oh, I think Bisbee should be visited during the day and night. I think the sense it's all there all the time.
Yeah, I've never been there at night. It's always been a day trip for me. So now I feel like I got to go book a room.
Yeah,
and experience this. You've definitely. I think you've done a good job of putting it in words. But the book is spectacular. We're running out of time, but there's another colorized photo. It's a famous photo. And I listened to different things on audio and recently a history of kind of a summary history of Mexico talked about Pancho Villa, who his soldiers at minimum, some people say he was there, raided our dude ranch, Rancho de la Osa, on the border. We definitely have the cannonballs from the raid. There definitely was a battle. Some argue he was there, some argue he wasn't. Either way, Revolucionarios and Federales had a fight there. It's in a newspaper account. So, but not to go on that. It was really interesting. Pancho Villa is a fascinating person. Yeah. Emilio, I think. Zapata.
Yes.
And in your photo, Urbina, and these were revolutionarios who kind of had their own little revolutions going concurrent, and none of them really wanted to be president, which I think is such a departure from most revolutions who are just sometimes searching for their own power. It's a great photo. It's been colorized, and talk a little bit about those guys and Mexican Revolution and what you see today.
Well, it's huge, big subject. I'll try to be real concise.
That's okay.
The Villa is from actually originally from Durango, but he spent a lot of time in Chihuahua and Sonora. There is another. There are so many dynamics in Bisbee. We've talked about copper, talked about fraternal societies. But one of the most important, and you could say the most important part of the history, again, very forgotten, is the presence of the Apaches, in particular the Chiricahua Apaches. Why? Because they kept the development of all this area. They postponed it literally for decades. And the Spanish, as they came up through Mexico, ultimately could not really successfully go into the southern United States. There was a constant war between the Apaches and the Spanish and Mexicans coming up.
That wasn't only in that area, but even below Tucson, the Spaniards would come up and then the Indians would drive them back, and that happened several times.
And one of the aspects of this is that the people in northern Chihuahua and Sonora became incredible Indian fighters, and because they had to deal with the Apaches, and the Apaches hated them. I mean, there's some books actually that talk about that. By the way, this war took place over almost 300 years, skirmishes, various battles between first the Spanish, then the Mexicans, then the United States. The Apaches were hardcore tough. They were tough. So what it did, though, is in Chihuahua and Sonora, they became really good fighters. And they did it on their own. They were fighting the Apaches on their own. The government was not helping that much. So Villa came out of that world, and Villa's followers who followed him, the Division of the North, were really independent, hardcore fighters. And so he was able to develop an army that was ferocious. And so, because Villa did not have very much education, but he was a very brilliant strategist. And so he develops this army that ended up defeating all these other armies within the Mexican Revolution, and ultimately met up with Zapata, who did the same in Chiapas, different history, and they took over Mexico City around early in the Revolution, around 1913. Revolution is a complex phenomenon, a lot of things happening. But what happened in this particular photograph is that they had met in Mexico City via meeting Zapata. They were both kind of peasants. They were not upper class. They were poor, had risen on skill. And so they met in this celebration and they walked to the palace. They had like 10,000 followers following them as they walked to the palace. And then they went in the palace. And so Villa sat in the presidential chair, which he's sitting in, where Porfirio Diaz had sat in, Zapata next to him. And a photographer took the picture. That scene lasted for probably 15 minutes, and then they left. But it has been preserved as this classic image of Villa and Zapata in Mexico City.
And the connotation is that they had conquered Mexico City.
And they had conquered Mexico City.
And then they handed it back.
Yes, they handed it back. They left, and other forces came in, and ultimately Villa was murdered, probably by the Mexican government in 1923. And Villa had a collapse. These people rose and they fell, and
history I heard not too long ago is Villa had kind of retired a little and moved down to Navajoa in his retirement.
It was near Navajoa is in Sonora. This was in south of Ciudad Chihuahua, near Parral.
Okay,
is where it was. This is in Chihuahua, and he was given, because they had to buy him off. He was an intense character. You didn't want to really mess with him, so the Mexican government bought him off and gave him a hacienda down there, and it was on a road trip that he was assassinated.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. He went to town, got drunk, and was going back home, and they shot him out of his car. Yeah.
And so do you see, because we got to wind this up, it's so much fun. Do you see does this history that we're talking about, does it move into what we're experiencing today at all?
Definitely. First of all, there were huge migration patterns from Mexico into the United States during the Mexican Revolution. In many ways, it set up the scene that we're seeing now. And many of those people who left Mexico to come into the United States left because of the incredible violence. There's some estimates that the last time Mexico was so violent before the Mexican Revolution was during the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs. So enormous amount of violence was taking place, driving people north to get away from the violence. It also set up a world where these northern states were pretty independent individuals and were not as reliant on the central and Mexico City and the central area, which I think in some ways has somewhat encouraged the cartels because there's a very strong cartel presence.
Meaning drug trade?
Drug trade, yes. In both in Chihuahua
meaning the
and
independence of the northern states, which are
Sonora and Chihuahua here. And then you have Baja California. But then as you move east, you have all these other states right along the borders with Texas. So there's what I haven't talked about here, but is in the book is the whole history of this border is a very long and intense history as well.
Well, we'll just have to have you back. And the book, because now everybody's going to want to get this book. It's not quite yet available. Is that
That's true. It should be on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I will be putting together a website by within a month where one could also get it.
Okay, what's it going to be called?
It'll be Virgil Hancock III will be the title of the website.
VirgilHancock3rd.com. THIRD or third spelled out?
Third as in Roman numeral.
Okay. That's why I'm asking.
Glad you asked.
Virgil Hancock, Roman numerals.com. And the other books you have produced?
The other books are all available on Amazon.
And they just look up Virgil Hancock, and they are the other books?
Actually, one is on Chihuahua.
Okay.
Where I went down there. Charles Bowden is the author of that. I actually have a portfolio in Sonora, an intimate geography. David Yetman is the author. David Yetman and I went down, traveled all over Sonora and the Sierra Madre.
Right.
And then I have a book called Open Range and Parking Lots of the Southwest. These are all photography books. And then American Byzantium, which is a book about Las Vegas. And then I have an unusual book outside of this about crossing the River of Fire, about the Jewish cemetery in Prague. That is a story connected with alchemy.
Different topic.
Different topic, but related, very related to alchemy. Very related to alchemy.
I can tell you that this conversation today has made me absolutely want to go to Bisbee as soon as I can.
Yeah, me too. Maybe we'll go together. So, yeah. Virgil, these other books you've talked about, they can all be found on the typical Amazon type stuff. And just look up Virgil Hancock, spelled as you would expect, Hancock. It's been great. Thank you very, very much.
I enjoyed it more than I can tell you.
You know, Alan and I want to thank the folks at Golden Wings Horseshoes and Fred, the owner and the man who came up with the first version of plastic shoes that work. These revolutionary horseshoes are like no others. We've tried the plastic. Everybody who has nearly 200 horses has problems. Lameness, this, that, and the other thing. Dude horses, trail horses, they pound a lot of trails. And just like us, if we do a lot of walking, our feet get sore, so do theirs. And we've looked for all options, and we've found some success here, there, and everywhere, but nothing like Golden Wings Horseshoes. And as I've said many times, we have horses that are on the trail working, happier, healthier than they were before because of these shoes that absorb concussion and are flexible. So they're much more like natural situation where horses are walking without shoes. There's a whole movement against metal shoes. Not sure you can get that way when you're up in these rocks, but the next best option is Golden Wings Horseshoes. We're even a distributor. You can get the horseshoes here now. That's how much we believe in Golden Wings Horseshoes. Of course, I always tell the story about a horse that hadn't worked in 18 months. 2 weeks after getting the Golden Wings, he was out back on the trails, and a few weeks later he was on that all-day ride. GoldenWingsHorseshoes.com. It's worth typing in all those letters. Golden Wings Horseshoes, 2 plurals there, .com, and they'll ship them right to you, and they're fast. Alan, I know you are always at the book festival, and it's, of course, one of the biggest book festivals in the U.S., and I love going down there as long as you can get parking. You got to have some kind of status like you, so you get some decent parking. But
when I got invited to go there, the first thing I asked is, can you provide parking?
Maybe I'll steal away in the back of your truck or something.
Exactly. But it's a fabulous deal. The U of A students are all gone for spring break, and so the whole campus is set up for the book festival, and I think 100,000 people show up for that. And,
I'll bet.
It's a really neat day to go down there and browse around and talk to the authors and eat a hot dog and whatever you do down there. I have fun every year, and I will be back.
Well, and you'll want to know that Virgil Hancock, today's guest, he's going to be in a panel with John Schaefer and Thomas Wieland, I think, and John Schaefer is the very respected former president of U of A, and they're going to be in the U of A Library Special Collections March 4th at 10 to 11 a.m., and that's Saturday. The festival is Saturday and Sunday, I believe.
Yes.
So Saturday, March 4th in U of A Library Special Collections, perfect place for Virgil to be, 10 to 11. And anybody local Festival of Books, they know they don't need to hear from us. It's a great place to be.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. And thank you to Stan Houston's production team for making this podcast possible. If you're in Tucson, plan to meet some of our past guests at the Tucson Festival of Books on March 4th and 5th on the campus of the University of Arizona. All events are free and open to the public. Find the festival lineup at TucsonFestivalofBooks.org. And be sure to join us next week for more interesting talk about the West. Until then, I'm Lynn Weezy Sneed, reminding you to stand tall and ride safe.